Welcome back to this continuing series on lectures on the principles of macroeconomics. Today, we're going to have a discussion of topic 11, I believe. So this actually is the last of the preliminary topics that are actually microeconomic in nature. And after this, we will be getting into macroeconomics proper and taking a look at some of the statistics and data on such things as inflation and deflation, employment and unemployment, and GDP. So hang on, we are about to get into macro. But first, this last topic in microeconomics. So let's see. Let me sign in here and go to the course we're in and to the lecture topics. And open those lecture topics up in a new tab, and I think I've done that already. And just to scroll to the top, here's lecture outline topics for Principles of Macroeconomics. We're covering chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. So basically, this is over chapter 4. I would cover some of the other topics in 4 and micro, but this topic has some relevance to macro in that one of the applications here that we're going to talk about could increase unemployment. It has an impact on the labor market. But anyway, we were talking about how the market system allocates resources through price and profit signals, and we discussed demand, supply, and equilibrium. Now we're going to take a look at disequilibrium. So we'll want to go through, once again, some graphs on excess demand or shortage and excess supply or surplus, and talk about how these might become permanent. In other words, what forces might keep the market from going to equilibrium. So let's get started by going to the PowerPoint on this topic. Here we go. I should take the edit button off so it seems more like what you see. Let's head down to topic 11. Here we go. And open it up. And actually, I've done that already right here. And here we go. So macroeconomics, topic 11. This is really the last preliminary topic on microeconomics before we get into macroeconomic topics. So, and remember, I may have mentioned that we wouldn't have to do these preliminaries if the college required that microeconomics be taken before macro. But that's not the case, and in fact, they encourage macro before micro. So let's just go to the move to equilibrium. This is what this first slide is about. And we went through all of this in topic 10. And we basically know that if 15 is the price, then there is a surplus right here. And this is the same graph we were using before of 100. And sellers have the incentive to start cutting price and reducing output. As they cut price, buyers will buy more, and this movement cutting output and cutting prices on the seller side, and buying more as the prices are cut on the buyer side will continue until we get back to equilibrium. And with the shortage, we went through the same graph in topic 10. You can see the shortage here. If the price is, maybe I should go to red here. So if the price is 5, the people want to buy 150, sellers are only willing to produce and sell 50, so there's a shortage of 100. It's now the buyers who are the active ones pushing us to equilibrium. A lot of buyers cannot get the product, right? And so what these people who didn't get the product they so desired will start bidding up the price, okay? And as the price is bid up, the buyers will be willing to buy a little less, and the sellers will be willing to produce a little bit more. And the bidding process will continue as long as the shortage persists, and gradually we will move back to equilibrium. And I don't know if I should have said gradually, depending upon the market. It could be almost instantaneously, as is the case in the stock market. Anyway, that's our equilibrium. But this idea of surplus and shortage turns out to be important in our disequilibrium. In other words, in what cases do surpluses persist or shortages? All right. And this is just the definition we saw in 10 about surplus and shortage. Surplus, another term for it is excess supply. Another term for shortage is excess demand. Okay, so here we go. Okay, I don't know what this is. Yeah, just surplus and shortage. Okay. So I think the part A is done, and now we're into part B, and that is we're going to answer the question of how shortages and surpluses can become permanent. And the answer are governmental price controls. Government. So the government is the only agency that has the power to keep markets from going to equilibrium. Now, sometimes I do get students who ask whether or not monopolies couldn't do that. And the answer is no, the markets will go to equilibrium in a monopoly. And, let's just deal with that right now. Let me go home here and let's add a new slide. And so basically, well, let's move this slide up. Yeah, I think that's good. Okay. Let's go back to this one here. I wanted to say that in a competitive market, the supply curve is equal to, if I can go to draw, I'd rather use the black one. I'm going to use the sigma sign here, which means sum of all the firms in the market's marginal cost curve. So this is really the theoretical part of microeconomics, a part we're not going to cover. But basically, you add up every business firm's from I guess I should equals 1 to however many firms are in the market. So horizontally, add all of those up, you get the supply curve, the demand curve more or less, and I'll put a little tilde sign above, meaning more or less is equal to the sum, if you will, of the marginal utility, the marginal benefit that consumers get from buying and consuming the good. And we add all of those up for the total population. in the market, and we get the demand curve. And so basically, yeah, supply curve represents cost, demand curve, benefit, okay? And this is going to help us understand the macroeconomic theory of monopoly. And basically, a monopoly means there's only one firm. And so if I draw the supply and demand curve for monopoly, monopoly, one firm in the industry or market. Maybe it's the electrical power company. Maybe it's a natural gas company. Maybe it's a telephone company. Maybe it's a cable company. All of these have been monopolies in the past. So basically, we put the price per unit here and the quantity of the good that we're talking about here. And the consumers still have a demand curve, and that still is some of the marginal utility curves. But then the business firm, we can't draw a supply curve here, but we can draw the marginal cost curve for the monopolist, okay? There's only one firm, that's it. And, the other thing we need here for micro theory is I'm just going to abbreviate marginal revenue. Maybe I'll let you know what it is down here. Marginal revenue. This is average revenue. So as the output is increased and they sell it, they have to lower prices on all the previous units they sold, and so marginal revenue falls. This is marginal cost, the additional cost of producing an additional unit. And so if you tried to think of this marginal cost as if supply curve, then the competitive price in this market would be here, and the competitive equilibrium output would be here. But here's the deal. Business firms maximize profits by adjusting output to what can I do this? Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So the monopolist, if it did that, it would maximize profits by producing at Q sub M, and it would sell that output at this price right here, okay? And so basically what monopolists do, and this is a very brief lesson and it's not going to be on the test. I hope you don't mind too much learning very briefly about this, and I hope it's not all Greek to you. But they reduce output. They have control over production, so they reduce output to push prices up, okay? That's what monopolies do. If you cannot find a firm doing this, that's being accused of being a monopoly, even if it's the biggest firm and most powerful firm in the industry, if it is not cutting output to raise prices, economists say, so what? Their good management and competitive nature has got them to the position they're in. Hey, but a firm that cuts output and raises prices, that is one that will raise economist hackles. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up, maybe I can do this, is this thick? Yeah. So basically, and I know the textbooks don't do this, but the monopolist firm decides to produce that amount, and only that amount. So in essence, this is, whoops, that's too fat. This is the supply curve of the monopolist. You can think of that as the supply curve of the monopolist, and it charges this price. Hey, there is no shortage or surplus in monopoly, okay? And that's what I was trying to say before. So a monopoly will not produce a disequilibrium condition where surpluses or shortages persist, okay? I guess as a side, we could talk about some cartels that try to control output to raise prices. Well, like OPEC does this. OPEC tries to cut output to raise prices. They're not terribly successful because they don't control all the output in the world. Maybe half of it. Not enough to control prices. But other cartels, like the diamond cartel, they're more interesting. And, if this were a microeconomics course, we might talk about that and say, well, isn't there a surplus in diamonds? In other words, the diamond cartel buys up excess diamonds and stores them away as a way to reduce the number of diamonds on the market. And there are a number of other cartels that have tried to do this, mostly without terrible success. I think the diamond monopoly may be the closest one to a successful monopoly taking this tactic. But we get off track here. All right, still economics. I just thought we would do this. But monopolies are not going to create permanent surpluses. All right, let's go to effective price controls. Now, there are price controls, and they can be ineffective. But to be effective, a price ceiling has to be set below the equilibrium price. Because if it were set above, in other words, you couldn't charge more than a given price. And the equilibrium price, if we go back here, for example, if you set the price ceiling to be 15, say, no, it's against the law to sell for more than 15. Well, the market's going to come to equilibrium at 10, so this price ceiling here would not be effective. A price floor to be effective must be set above the equilibrium price. If it's set below, it won't be effective. In other words, in this market, if we set $5 per unit to be the floor, saying it's against the law to pay less than $5, well, we're going to get to equilibrium before we get down to $5. So it's not an effective price control. So to be effective, a price floor must be above equilibrium, a price ceiling must be below. So you can sort of think about this as an upside down world to be effective. In other words, the floors have to be above equilibrium, the ceilings below. The floors have to be above the ceilings. Okay. Let's head to a price ceiling. So here is a price ceiling, and basically the government says it's against the law to charge more than $8 for good X, okay? And so suppliers are only willing to supply 100. Consumers want to buy 190. There's a big shortage, but suppliers are in control here. They'll only produce 100. That's it. Okay, so we have a shortage, and it'll persist as long as this price ceiling is in existence. Probably I should have probably created another duplicate graph. Let me think about this. So what examples do we have of price ceilings? Well, I think the most famous one would be, we'll just use this one. Rent control. All right, so basically you set a maximum rent that landlords can charge, okay? And obviously, landlords, if they hear that's coming, will try to withdraw their rental units from the market. Maybe there'll be some law saying if you were renting at such and such a date before the law, you must still rent. But some really interesting studies have been made about rent control in New York City, in Amsterdam, in various European countries, along the West Coast, in Berkeley, Santa Monica, other places. And basically what happens is all sorts of, efforts by landlords and renters too to get around these rent controls. Come into being, under the table payments, very strange key payments of thousands of dollars. Some renters who have been frozen into way below market rental rates will sublet their places, even though that's against the law. It happens all the time. Landlords respond by not maintaining the apartments, so they gradually deteriorate. In New York City, the deterioration became so severe that many buildings were declared uninhabitable. Homeless people would then occupy them. Landlords, for a while, would then perhaps pay someone to set their building on fire and burn it down so that they could get their insurance money. Then they wouldn't rebuild it. Sometimes homeless people were caught in these fires. So, which is too bad. It's a consequence of rent control. What else? The buildings would not be rebuilt. And I believe the idea of condominiums came out of this, and that is that condominiums, each person who lives in an apartment will be part owner of the apartment complex. And then there'll be like a homeowners association, except it'll be a condominium owners association who'll make the laws and regulations of the condominium, and collect fees to keep it up. So I don't know, it just goes on and on and on. Quite interesting. Let's go to the next one. So a price floor. So price floor, you set it above equilibrium, and say the government says it's against the law to pay less than this amount for this product or this service. And so this creates a surplus in this market. We're going to talk about agricultural support systems, I think, towards the end here. So another very famous price floor is the minimum wage. And really, if it's not set very far above equilibrium, like right now, I don't know, they were talking for several years of trying to raise it. I believe it's around, I don't know what it is right now, around $7 or $8 in Texas. I believe that's way below what business firms were willing to pay people who had no experience and no skill before the pandemic hit. I remember going to Home Depot and seeing signs that they would start people at $13 an hour. And I saw similar signs near where I live at fast food places, also saying they'd pay at least $13. So if you raise it to 15 and it was 13, in other words, if this were if we have the wage here, and this is 13 and this is 15, you're probably not going to have that big of a surplus, if any at all, because the demand and supply curves are much more steeply sloped. But still, economists are generally not so much in favor of these. Interestingly enough, Germany didn't have a minimum wage law until about a year or two ago, and they only did that because the social justice warriors were upset that the United States had one and Germany didn't. I don't believe they have one even now in Sweden and Denmark, interestingly enough. So, yeah, that's just interesting to note. But if you were to really do it, and I know I've had Texas prig workers canvass my home for various things. They're always doing some sort of thing that's going to, in their idea, improve the world. Minimum wage was one, and they came by a few years ago looking to raise the minimum wage in Austin, I think, to $9 or $10, because wasn't I concerned about low wage workers? And I said I was very concerned, and I wouldn't sign it though unless it had a $50 minimum wage, because wouldn't $50 be better than like $9? And of course, I was just playing the devil's advocate here, because if you did have such an absurdly high one, the impact on the labor market for very young people who are getting their first jobs would be really horrible. They couldn't find one, basically, is what it would be. Very few would find one. Yeah, there is something here. Let me go to another screen and see if I can find this. I was just thinking about this. How minimum wage laws came into effect in the United States is covered in a book. Let me go to Amazon.com And let's take a look at The State Against Blacks by Walter Williams. Walter Williams is an economist at George Mason University. I don't know, he's, I think, older than me, but I don't know if this is even in print yet, paperback. Wow, hardcover, paperback. Oh my God, I should look up my paperback that I have. $226. Huh. Anyway, there's a chapter in here that is about the minimum wage and how it came into being and how minimum wage came into being in other places. Many times, like in South Africa and here in the United States, it was basically anti-black. It was meant to keep blacks from getting employment in certain industries. So too bad it doesn't have a table of contents here. Oh well. Walter Williams, State Against Blacks, has a very interesting chapter on the minimum wage and its history, how it came into being in the 1930s here in the United States as a way for textile mills in the Northeast, especially in Massachusetts, to keep their industry from relocating to the South, in South Carolina mainly. Because people would work for less money there. And so they tried to raise the minimum wage so that differential wouldn't matter anymore. All right. Oh, well, okay, let's go back to PowerPoint. Yeah, get off on that a little bit. So then I take this from the textbook. Do colleges use GPAs, ACTs, SATs for purpose of admission? Apparently some colleges are doing away with this, but basically what you have here is the number of students they can admit, and some colleges have a huge demand to get into their college, and at the tuition rate, even though it's huge. Where was it? Where those students, was that in Boston, Northeastern, and they had freshman orientation, and some of the students broke the rules and got together, even though they kept their distance and had masks on to watch a basketball team, and they were expelled before they even started classes. And the Northeastern wouldn't give them back their tuition, which was $36,000. Now, they were only expelled for one semester. Gosh, I'm hoping the tuition wasn't $36,000 a semester. Ooh, it's hard for me to think that you would still have a shortage at that price, but still, maybe it's only $18,000 a semester. I don't know. So they use these tests to determine who gets in and who doesn't. Well, obviously they've relaxed that, and they use other things too, like underrepresented, historically underrepresented. If you're a member of a historically underrepresented group, you can get in also. But still, even they have to make fairly high ACTs and SATs. So, so that's how they deal with the shortage there. I suppose I could just bid them up to the equilibrium price. Supply and demand on a freeway. So at 11 p.m. at night, there's, since it doesn't cost anything to drive on a freeway, it's free, not a tollway, then there's plenty of space, no shortage. But during rush hour, there's a big shortage. So really a toll of 70 cents would clear away the shortage. And that's why most economists, support tollways. And I know when they built the first tollways here in Austin, and there must be some out towards Vista Ridge, I believe 183A, people were very upset, saying they're paying their gasoline taxes to build the highways. They don't see why they are charged to drive on them. But basically, tolls are a way to control congestion. Kidney market, it's against the law to buy kidneys and to sell kidneys. So there is a shortage there. And gosh, I suppose, there's usually an illegal market in these. And, you hear about those sometimes. 10 a.m. classes in college. So I know if you're in college, you would prefer to go to class at 10 a.m. than 8 p.m., maybe even 8 a.m. or 7 a.m. ACC used to have classes that started at 7 a.m. Some of the legislatively required classes continued to make, but economic classes couldn't make it 7 a.m. But at 10 a.m. and noon and 1 p.m., yes. In fact, those filled up right away, so you'd have a shortage. Price floors and winners and losers, and here's where we get the agricultural products that I wanted to talk about. A price floor placed on agricultural foodstuffs ends up lowering consumers' surplus, okay? And creates a deadweight loss. So, this is an interesting thing that I wanted to talk about because I wanted to talk about, the problem of people being overweight in our country. And gosh, I'm one of those sinners too. My doctor continues to tell me to lose weight. 3 years ago I lost a bunch of weight, but in an interesting diet, but I put back half of it before the coronavirus, and the coronavirus is destroyed my willpower, and I've gained the rest of it back. But anyway, I would like to talk about this problem of people being overweight in America, and this whole thing about the agricultural support system, which they don't talk about here or in the textbook. So they do want to talk about how price floors for agricultural goods create a deadweight loss. So let's take a look. What is a deadweight loss? A loss to society of not producing the competitive or supply and demand determined level of output. So that happens under price controls too. And this is a price control. So here you go. So essentially, this is the price floor, the subsidy, if you will, agricultural price floor for various commodities from corn to maybe soybeans and some others that exist, dairy products, other things. So basically what they're saying is that before the price controls, the consumer surplus, like at an equilibrium right here, was 1, 2, and 3. But after the price controls, it's just 1. So consumers have lost some of their consumer surplus. They've lost 2 and 3. Producers, before the price controls, they had a producer surplus of 4 and 5. After the price controls, they have 2 and 4. And so then, to society, this little triangle is lost, and that is what's called a deadweight loss to society, okay? Let's see what we have down here. So basically, the social surplus is just this area now and not this area in here. That's the deadweight loss to society because only this quantity is being consumed. Okay. And it's interesting, this problem, this thing in talking about the deadweight loss doesn't talk about, well, what do you mean? This is how much that was this, let's call it Q3, was how much suppliers produced. Buyers would only buy Q2. So what happened to the surplus of Q3 minus Q2? Where did it go? That's an interesting question. I wonder if I can reproduce this. Gosh, I hope not with the drawings. Yikes, let's find out. Reset, hide, new slide, duplicate slide. Ah, darn. Is there a eraser? There isn't. Okay. I want to delete this slide then. Let's go to the house, home, and we'll come back and just draw another one. So basically, in these agricultural products, if I can draw a supply and demand curve here, I don't know, maybe we have corn. And this is in bushels. And I do this quite consciously. And this is price per bushel. And I'm so far away from agriculture, I don't know what it is. It must be, I'm guessing, around $5 a bushel. And you have a supply and demand curve. And who knows what it is. I'm just going to say it's $3 a bushel, and the government is going to guarantee $6 a bushel. And there is the price floor. Well, this is Q2 using, I don't know how many bushels are produced. I don't even want to guess nationally. And this is the surplus. Okay, so here's where I get to give you some autobiographical information about myself. So actually, I'm not a native Texan, though I've been here long enough, I think, to be one almost. Uh, what's the saying? I wasn't born here, but I got here as soon as I could. I came right after I graduated high school from Illinois, Northern Illinois. And I came from a small community about 90 miles southwest of Chicago. Interesting at that time, it was prosperous. There were a lot of small factories and even some big businesses, located all about the county I was born in and went to high school in. My ancestors settled in Illinois somewhere in the 1820s to 30s. It's uncertain exactly. But the story I tell is that when I was a young boy, we would drive down the road, and every once in a while you'd see these huge mounds of corn just sitting in the field rotting away, and say, what's going on here? It's just sitting out in the weather and just molding and rotting away. And well, basically that was a surplus. Okay, that was the surplus the government had bought, and that was just sitting there. Well, reporters in Chicago got very upset because there were some hungry people around in the United States, and why should we have all this food just rotting away when there were hungry people? The first thought of the government was to hide it then, so they then loaded up on barges on the Illinois River, which wasn't far away, and floated them down the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico and dumped them in the Gulf, I guess to feed the fish. Well, reporters in Chicago got wind of this and demanded change. And so basically what you have now is basically some surplus food was distributed, and then food stamps were created as a way to get rid of the surplus. And but the next program they had was to take the surplus and ship it to less developed countries, South America, Africa, and India in particular. And they just flooded India with this stuff, driving the prices of foodstuff, grains down there and hurting agricultural workers and farmers there, earning the United States great hate for this. I would go into more details. We actually quote sold unquote the stuff to them for printed material. So we subsidized the printing presses in India, and huge amounts of printed material from India came into the country. They didn't know where to store it. And I believe the UT system has a library on the corner of Martin Luther King and Red River. I believe it's on the southwest corner, which was built exclusively to house some of this printed material. Other universities did the same. So an economist finally came up with an idea to get rid of the surplus while still maintaining the subsidy. And basically, the economist said, why don't we just tell the farmers to produce as much as they want at this guaranteed price, and then tell them to sell it? So, like the monopolist, the supply curve, ag support supply curve basically became like this, and it intersected the demand curve here, and the price, let's say, of agricultural products went down to $2. And then the economist idea was, well, instead of accumulating the surplus or trying to get rid of it, just pay them what was called a deficiency payment. In other words, $6 minus $2 is $4 times Q3 minus Q2. So the government would just pay farmers for the surplus they produced above what they could sell it for. All right? So here's an interesting thing I'd like you to think about. In a free market, I guess the equilibrium quantity would be here. Before this economist thought up of the way to get it, output was here. Of course, when the economists did this, I believe it was in the early 80s, this is when Americans started gaining weight. And, hey, is it any wonder, right? So if they wanted Americans to lose weight, they should just go back to the old way of getting surpluses. And maybe they could burn it now for electricity, renewable energy. Oh, there you go. So obviously this would push the price of food up, but it might solve people who are overweight's problem, because now it would be much more expensive to buy all that good stuff we're eating. Anyway, I'm always surprised by the fact that when the problem of being overweight, which leads to high blood pressure, is discussed, they don't talk about how the agricultural program has contributed to this. I have other stories about this program. But here's the interesting thing about this, this graph. Where's the dead weight loss? I guess, I'm just going to say the dead weight loss is here. In other words, we're producing more than we would before, and the marginal cost is greater than the marginal benefit of doing it. So the dead weight loss must be right here. But look at this, is that consumer surplus is everything in here. And producer surplus is everything above the supply curve up to that. So the consumer and producer surplus overlap. I don't know. So is it true that this way of dealing with the problem creates even more surplus than originally existed? Of course, the question is, where do you get this money? Now, so basically, and here we'll get into macroeconomics, but let's just assume we're on the level, straightforward government. We'd get it by taxing people and then paying it to farmers. So in that case, consumers aren't avoiding the cost at all. They're just not faced with the cost when they buy food. They're faced with the cost when they pay their taxes. However, our government may not raise taxes. It may just borrow the money. Oh, well. It's fun to think about this because what would the dead weight loss be without that program? In other words, if they had the surplus, the dead weight loss would be everything in here, right? And I'm saying that the dead weight loss is just this part here now, because they're producing more than the equilibrium quantity. And here they'd be consuming, they're producing and consuming more than the equilibrium quantity. Over here they'd be consuming, well, I don't know. Is a dead weight loss? There's a surplus, right? We might talk about this in lecture, how to figure out this dead weight loss problem. It's not as straightforward as the discussion above would seem. All right. Well, I always like talking about this topic, but all good things must come to an end. And this is the end of the introductory material in this Principles of Macroeconomics course. The next lecture will be, I believe, on the Consumer Price Index and how it measures inflation. So we're into macroeconomic topics in the next lecture. See you there.